My husband celebrated his birthday with his mistress in front of me. He asked her to cut the cake I baked with my own hands. Everyone watched my humiliation like it was entertainment. He pretended I did not exist in my own home that night. I decided to destroy everything he thought I would tolerate. My name is Emily, and for years I believed my marriage was everything. I had spent countless nights cooking, cleaning, arranging, and planning my life around Daniel. Every detail of our home, every corner, every small gesture was meant to make him feel loved, safe, and respected. I postponed dreams. I postponed promotions. I postponed happiness, telling myself that love requires sacrifice. But over the years, the warmth of our home faded, and the shadows of secrets began to grow darker than I had ever imagined. First, it was small things, the late nights at the office that suddenly became longer, the strange silences on his phone, the sudden smiles that did not reach his eyes. I tried to convince myself it was work stress, that he was tired, that love sometimes needs patience. I told myself these lies until the lies became unbearable truths that I could no longer ignore as birthday approached. And I wanted to do everything right. I planned weeks in advance. I bought his favorite flowers, prepared the food he loved. The table was set with candles and soft lights. I dressed in the outfit that once made him look at me as if I were the only woman in the world. I rehearsed my smile. I practiced my laughter. I imagined the look of surprise, the warmth in his eyes, the gentle touch of his hand on mine, hoping this would bring back the man I had married. The evening came in. I heard the doorbell ring. My heart leaped, imagining it was him stepping into the life we had built. But when I opened the door, the reality was unbearable. Daniel was not alone, his hand intertwined with a younger woman's hand. She was confident, polished, and her smile seemed to mock me. She walked in with him into our home like she had always belonged there. I froze for a moment, feeling the cold grip of betrayal fill every inch of my body. Guests froze as she wished him a happy birthday, loudly, her voice cutting through the soft lights of the room. Daniel ignored me entirely. He did not even glance at me, his eyes fixed on her as he pulled her close to his side. The air was heavy with shock, silence, and humiliation, and yet I did not cry. I did not scream. I stood still, observing their celebration. A life that I had built brick by brick, and yet I was invisible to him and to everyone else. I stepped into the kitchen, away from their laughter, and whispered, "Congratulations." I allowed myself a single breath of clarity. In that moment I realized that pain was no longer pain. It had become clarity and anger, clarity and strength. I had been blind for too long, but now I saw every lie, every betrayal, every hidden moment that had been buried under years of pretending and ignoring while they laughed. In the living room, I made a silent promise to myself that this night would not break me. It would awaken me. I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer be overlooked. I began planning my final gift for Daniel, a gift that he would never be able to unwrap, a gift that would expose every lie, take back everything he thought he had stolen from me, and finally give me the peace and justice I deserved. I began slowly collecting evidence, gathering every secret he thought I would never discover. I recorded conversations secretly. I saved messages. I documented bank statements, contracts, emails, photos, everything that proved his betrayal and dishonesty. I worked quietly, carefully, methodically for months while pretending to be the same obedient, loving wife he had always underestimated. I played my part. I smiled. I cooked. I acted as if nothing was wrong, while all along I was building the foundation of his downfall. I listened to his lies carefully, noting every time he flaunted his mistress or ignored my presence. I saved every detail like a map to his destruction, because I knew one day every action would lead to a consequence, and that consequence would be delivered by me. Evenings were the hardest. I watched him interact with our guests, pretending to be charming and devoted, while the truth was glaringly clear to me. I felt the sting of betrayal in every laugh he shared with her, every glance that did not meet mine, but I also felt a new power growing inside me. The quiet, unwavering determination of someone who has seen the truth and refuses to be victimized any longer. I imagined the moment when I would finally confront him, when I would finally place all the evidence in front of him, the power in the room would shift the way a storm shifts a quiet afternoon. The arrogance in his eyes would fade into fear. The smirk would disappear, and he would finally realize that the woman he believed powerless was the one who held the key to everything he valued. Everything he built, everything he thought he could control. The night ended as they left for dinner together, without a single word to me. I stayed in the empty house, surrounded by the decorations I had placed for him, surrounded by the light that seemed dimmer now in contrast to the darkness he brought. I walked slowly through the rooms, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing but clarity. There was no sadness, no self-pity, only the cool, sharp certainty that I would reclaim my life and dismantle the world he had built on deceit. That night, I began to plan the final step of my gift. I would not act out of anger. I would not be loud. I would not create a scene. My revenge would be careful, calculated, undeniable, every move deliberate. Every word recorded, every piece of evidence organized, so that when the time came, it would topple him completely, and I would rise free from the shadows of betrayal that had haunted me. For too long, I laid awake that night thinking about the future. I imagined the consequences that would unfold. I imagined the panic in his eyes, the disbelief on his face, the whispers among his colleagues, the shock when everyone discovered the truth. I smiled quietly to myself because this was no longer about revenge. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and finally embracing the power I had hidden even from myself. The morning after Daniel's birthday felt strangely calm. The house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, almost rehearsed. Like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Daniel walked around the kitchen, yawning, stretching, checking his phone, smiling at whatever message his mistress had surely sent him. He did not look at me, but that no longer mattered because soon he would have no choice but to face me face. The truth, face the consequences. He believed he was too powerful to ever lie. Watched him silently from across the table, sipping my coffee slowly, deliberately, while he scrolled through his phone. The arrogance in his posture, the casual entitlement in the way he moved around our home felt almost unreal. How could a man betray the one person who had built their life with him and still act like nothing had happened? But that was the depth of his blindness. He saw my silence as surrender, not knowing that silence can be sharper than any blade if used correctly. I had already collected every piece of evidence, months of careful observation and quiet recording, months of pretending to believe his lies, months of saving screenshots, emails, transactions, secret meets, hidden payments, and photographs. He thought I would never find I had become a quiet shadow following the truth, unnoticed, unchallenged, unbroken as. Daniel sat down at the table. I placed a thick folder in front of him, the weight of it heavy enough to shift the air between us. He raised an eyebrow, confused, annoyed, already forming excuses in his mind. He asked me, "What is this?" without looking up, but I simply gestured for him to open it, not speaking, not blinking, creating a silence so sharp he had no choice but to feel it when he finally opened the folder. His hand stopped moving, his breath caught in his throat. I watched his eyes scan the first page, then the second, then the next. His skin turned pale, his lips parted slightly in disbelief. The confident, arrogant man who walked into the room moments earlier began to crumble right in front of me without a single word spoken. I had taken his power from Shim inside. The folder was everything: recordings of him admitting financial fraud, messages with his mistress discussing money he had stolen from joint accounts, documents proving illegal business transactions, bank statements showing secret transfers, hidden investments, hidden properties, every detail laid out so clearly that even he could not twist or manipulate. The truth. He looked up at me, startled, angry, frightened, but most of all, exposed for the first time in years. He realized that I was not the naive wife he thought I was. He opened his mouth to speak, but the silence between us suffocated his words. I had already done what needed to be done. I had already sent copies of everything to his business partners, the board of directors, and the legal authorities, well before he even touched the folder. In front of him, his phone buzzed loudly on the table, and he grabbed it quickly. the panic in his eyes growing with every message that popped up. Partners demanding explanations, board members asking for emergency meetings, lawyers forwarding legal concerns. His empire was cracking one notification at a time. He looked at me again, but my expression remained calm, unmoved, untouched by his desperation. He shouted, asking me if I understood what I had done, but the irony of his question was almost laughable. He had spent years destroying me from within. Slowly, carefully, deliberately, but the moment he faced consequences, he panicked like a child. He begged me to help him to undo this, to fix the damage, but I simply stood up from my chair without speaking and walked toward the stairs, leaving him. Drowning in the reality he created, I could hear him pacing the floor. Frantically, his footsteps loud and unsteady, the sound of drawers opening, the sound of papers scattering, the sound of denial turning into fear, fear turning into anger, anger turning into pleading, but none of it reached me. I had lived through pain, now he would live through consequences. Entered our bedroom, opened my wardrobe, and began packing my things. Slowly, carefully, peacefully. For the first time there was no ache in my chest, no hesitation, no confusion. I was finally choosing myself. After years of choosing him, the suitcase felt lighter than the emotions I had carried for so long. Every folded shirt, every neatly placed item felt like taking back a small part of myself that I had lost in the chaos of our marriage. Daniel stormed into the room, still panicking, asking me to stop, asking me to think, asking me to understand what this would do to him and his career and his reputation. But that was the moment I truly saw him clearly. He was not worried about me. He was worried about losing everything he had taken for granted. He was worried, about losing control, losing power, losing the false image he had built. Turned to him and looked into his eyes for the first time, without fear, without pain, without love. I told him in complete silence, with only my expression, that I was done, and for the first time he understood. He tried to grab my hand, but I stepped back. He looked wounded, but it was not heartbreak. It was realization that he no longer owned any part of my life or my choices. I walked past him down the stairs, my suitcase rolling softly behind me. The house that once felt safe now felt like a memory, a place where I lost myself slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to sacrifice. Daniel followed behind me, begging, pleading, promising, but none of his words mattered anymore. Promises mean nothing when the truth has already spoken louder than anything he could say. When I reached the front door, I paused just for a moment, not for him, not for the memories, not for the past, but for myself. I inhaled deeply, letting the air fill the space that had once been occupied by pain and emptiness. I opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind me, knowing I would never walk through it again. Drove away from the house, and with every mile, I felt lighter, freer, stronger. The road stretched out ahead of me like a new beginning, a life waiting to be reclaimed. I found a small apartment in the quiet part of town, nothing luxurious, nothing grand, but it felt like peace. It felt like safety. It felt like mine. Next few days were filled with headlines, articles, breaking news stories, interviews, business scandals, everything connected to Daniel unraveling publicly. His company suspended him. The board removed him. His partners demanded clarifications. Investors pulled out. Stock values collapsed. The empire he had built on deception was falling brick by brick, exactly the way he had built it, through lies, manipulation, betrayal, and now exposure. He called me dozens of times, but I never answered. He sent messages begging me to come back, promising to change, promising to be better, promising everything he had never given. But I had learned that empty promises are just quieter versions of lies, and I was done living in silence. My life slowly began to rebuild itself. I found work, found routines, found moments of joy I had not felt in years. I began waking up without fear, without dread, without sadness. I learned to enjoy mornings again. I learned to walk without heaviness. I learned to breathe without pain. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman reborn, a woman who had survived a betrayal that could Have broken her a woman who chose truth over illusion, strength over silence, dignity over destruction. Daniel, on the other hand, faced a reality. He never imagined the mistress disappeared the moment the money and power faded. The people who once praised him now avoided him. The company he once controlled now pushed him out the life he'd built for himself shattered exactly the way he shattered my trust. Yet I felt no satisfaction, only closure, because revenge was never about hurting him. It was about freeing myself, freeing my heart, my mind, my future, and I had finally done it. I had broken the chains he thought I would carry forever. He would never unwrap the final gift I gave him because it was not wrapped in paper or ribbons. It was wrapped in truth and consequences, and truth always reveals what lies try to hide. The days after I left, Daniel became a quiet storm inside me every morning. I woke up and felt the weight of freedom pressing gently against my chest. The air smelled different in my new apartment, as if every breath I took carried away a little. More of the past, a little more of the years I had spent invisible, a little more of the pain that had once consumed me. Unpacked slowly, each item in my suitcase became a symbol of reclaiming myself. Every folded shirt, every neatly placed shoe. Reminder that I was no longer living for someone else. I was building a life for me. Finally, for the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing without chains around my soul. Work became my sanctuary. I focused on my career, on things I had postponed, on skills I had hidden, on talents I had ignored for the sake of marriage. I started small, but with each achievement, the feeling of power within me grew stronger than I had ever imagined it could. The very woman Daniel tried to silence was now standing. Tall, proud, and unstoppable. Evenings were still moments of reflection sometimes. The loneliness pressed heavily against my chest, but I reminded myself that loneliness is not sadness, it is clarity. It is space to heal and to rebuild, and I began writing down my thoughts, my feelings, my plans for a future that no longer depended on anyone but me. News reports still carried Daniel's name. I read them quietly, without excitement, without glee, because his downfall was never my goal. My freedom was my goal. I smiled at the irony of life, how the man who thought he could control everything was now at the mercy of the truth he had buried for so long while. I stood free, creating a life unshackled by lies. Friends I had neglected over the years returned. Slowly, as I reached out to them, rebuilding connections, friendships that had been fractured by my silence and his manipulation. Laughter came back into my life. Dinners, coffee, afternoons, long walks, conversations that mattered, and for the first time in years I felt understood, I felt seen, I felt human. Months passed, and with them the pain faded into a memory I could reflect on without bitterness, without anger, because anger is heavy. And I no longer carried unnecessary weight. I had become a woman, defined by resilience, clarity, and dignity, not by betrayal or heartbreak. I had transformed my suffering into strength and my silence into action. I walked past Daniel's life like a shadow. He would occasionally appear in the news, court hearings, scandals, and whispers in the business world, yet I never stopped for a second to look back. I had no desire to see the man who tried to diminish me, because I had discovered something more powerful than revenge, something he could never take away. My peace, my independence, my voice, my freedom. One day I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking at the city lights, reflecting on how far I had come. The streets below were alive with energy, people moving forward, unaware of my small yet monumental transformation, and I felt a surge of gratitude for myself. For having the courage to leave, for having the patience to plan, for having the wisdom to wait for the right moment to act. He remembered every detail of that night of humiliation. The laughter, the candles, the mistress's smug faces, and then I smiled quietly because I knew the truth. The gift I had given Daniel had never been about money or empire or reputation. It had been about truth and consequence, and that truth had set me free. I began volunteering at a local organization, helping women who had been trapped in relationships where love had become control, helping them find their voice, helping them understand the strength they already possessed. I shared my story, Not for sympathy, but for empowerment, for proof that no one has the right to diminish another human being, and that freedom is always possible if you have the courage to claim it in those moments. I felt connected to something larger than myself. A purpose beyond survival, a life beyond heartbreak, the woman I once thought weak was now a beacon of strength, guiding others, showing that survival is not enough, that thriving is possible, and that reclaiming your life can be done with dignity, grace, and unshakable courage. Years later, I would occasionally hear Daniel's name in whispers of the past, his empire never fully recovering, his reputation permanently scarred by his own actions, yet never celebrated his failures. I simply acknowledged them as the natural result of the choices he had made. Choices built on deception and betrayal that always come full circle. Finally understood the depth of true freedom. It is not measured by revenge or punishment. It is measured by peace, by clarity, by the quiet smile you give yourself in the morning, knowing you have survived. You have grown, you have won, not by breaking someone else, but by lifting yourself to heights you never imagined. As I looked out at the horizon, one quiet evening feeling, the wind brushed softly against my face, I whispered to myself, the gift I gave him, the one he could never unwrap, was never about him. Was about me reclaiming everything he tried to take, my life, my power, my dignity, and I had reclaimed it all with quiet strength, with careful thought, with patience, with clarity. The past became a memory, the house, a ghost, the pain, a teacher, and my life. A testament to resilience, to courage, to the quiet, unstoppable power of a woman who chose herself over betrayal, who chose truth over lies, who chose freedom over submission, who chose to rise once. He ignored me on his birthday and thought he had one, but that night became the last night he could ever make me feel invisible, the last night he could ever control my life, the last night he could ever underestimate me. And I rose from that darkness, not just as a survivor, but as the author of my own life. My own story, my own story, my own sense. I have lived unshackled, unafraid, unstoppable, and free.